Okay, so hello DBH. We're going to be talking about this last section with my friends. So we'll see how this goes. I don't know.
What was the first prompt question you were going to start with?
That prompt question that we were going to talk about. Like, I guess...
What is postmodernism?
Yeah, what is postmodernism? So what do you guys think it is? Because I think that'd be helpful, and it'll fill up time.
Oh, you know.
Well, I do know. So what do you guys think it is?
I think, for what I've seen, it's a lot of not being able to speak. I mean, you can't. A lot of times in the Christian culture, we talk about speaking truth in other people's lives, and I think postmodernism can be a threat to that, because you can't speak. You can't really speak at all in other people's lives. You can't say that they're wrong, but even more importantly, you can't tell them, you know, this way is better. Even because if they say no, my way is better.
You're just like, okay.
You're like, okay, you're right. Like, you know, that is better for you. This is better for me. But in relevance to the church, I mean, our call is to show people, you know, God's way is the best way. Like, He created us, and He knows the best way to live life. And so, if we can't, you know, if our world completely rejects telling anybody there's a better way, I think, you know, we're in a little bit of trouble. But it's kind of the extreme end of postmodernism, maybe.
From as best as I understand it, kind of the idea of postmodernism, obviously postmodernism is a response to modernism, and then you have modernism, which was the response to pre-modernism, which was the whole pre-modernism during that stage was very kind of I don't know if metaphysical. It was very focused on the spiritual, where everything you found your basis of truth based off a supreme being. So everything was based, you found truth based off God, and then you moved into the modernist period, which was based off fact and science, and with the Industrial Revolution, everything, you know, could be done by humanity, and that we could test truth, which, I mean, in relevance to the church was the whole mentality of being able to, you know, prove seven-day creation,
like, or apologetics and
yeah.
stuff like that.
So how long has postmodernism, in the context of how we're talking of it now, been around?
Is that a prompt or a question?
No, I mean, that's like, I'm wondering, like, how long is it, like how long?
No, like, it depends. Like, Nietzsche started writing, and he's like considered one of the fathers of postmodernism. Like the late 1800s, early 1900s is like when that started. But it's really,
it takes a while for it to go down from being like
like
a philosophical
yeah.
idea to being part of the cultural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
like, and it kind of picked up in like the 60s and 70s when that kind of like discovery, the whole hippie
the whole
movement,
sexual
yeah.
revolution of
Yeah,
you know, we don't
everything,
have to,
women burning
we
their
don't have to believe
bras
that.
and stuff like that. Like when everything was kind of breaking apart. Jameson, you can laugh. It's cool.
It's okay. Anything's okay. Postmodern.
But it's kind of interesting, I guess, in the way we discuss stuff. At least one of the things I've noticed is that we don't even realize that we're affected by postmodernism. Like, when we will discuss postmodernism, we kind of have an opinion on it. And if someone tries to tell us, like, differently on it, we're like, no, you can't tell me that because that's, like, wrong. This is my opinion. And just in saying that, you're, like, defining postmodernism with your statement.
Does it come into play at the same time of like our acceptance of, not just like disagreeing, but you know, with homosexuality and like all these like, you know, drinking and all this stuff, saying like, well, no, I see where you're coming from. Like, is that part of postmodernism where you can say like your agreement of other people and just acceptance of their views? Is that part of it, or is it just your?
So you can say like, that's not right for me.
But it's okay.
Since you're doing it, like it's okay for you to do.
And what?
For me, that's not right.
I think that's a good question. I had never even thought of like. So then, is that that's the mentality we've always grown up with?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I believe this because I
choose to believe it.
I mean, yeah, I choose this form of beliefs, but then what does that look like for somebody else?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that was the case for my grandparents, for my great-grandparents.
They would kind of more be like, this is because it is, and no one can disagree with it because that's just the way it is. But with postmodernism, I guess what it's called is like a rejection of meta-narratives, which means like big stories. So the meta-narrative that, I don't know, like reason, and that like the world is moving towards like positive, like is progressing more and more to be better, is like a meta-narrative of modernism, and that it's going to keep getting better. But postmodernism rejects that and says like you have no way of knowing that, and it's really concerned with, I guess, each person has their own individual story, and it's not somewhat like some overarching scheme of things. It's just one individual thing.
Which the whole that meta-narrative of being able to, like, of humanity continue to improve. I mean, that was the whole idea when everyone believed that World War I was the war to end all wars. Because we believed that we were thus progressed past the need for war. And that was the whole mentality with the Church of the Nazarene. Like, the book that we've been reading in Doctrine and Holiness by Dr. Quanstrom, like, they were like, okay, so everyone, you know, in the Church of the Nazarene that is saved and sanctified today, if they get if you get one person saved and sanctified, just each one of you, and then that person does it, we'll have the entire world saved and sanctified in 16 years, and Jesus will be coming back. Like, it was a very positive outlook on life. And even with the war, World War I, they're like, oh, well, now we're past that. So it was then when Depression and World War II hit that everyone was like, oh,
and like that,
wrong.
That whole like 1910 to like through World War II is kind of something that like kind of gave postmodernism like a strong footing, because it started to destroy so many of the stuff that we held as certain. Like being able to drop a bomb on a city and kill 500,000 people at one time kind of shook people's confidence in like solid things. If death and change could be that instantaneous, it would just, you know, kind of rattle people, I guess. So how do you think, you commented on it some, but how do you think the church needs to respond to postmodernism, where people, I guess, reject meta-narratives and are interested in kind of looking for God on their own terms and living their life on their own terms and their own story, and not really believing in something like the Bible as it's been taught in kind of a modern era where these are the hardcore truths and this is how you get to heaven by following these truths?
Before you answer that, just a quick question. Is like, was postmodernism, the idea of it created as a part of Christianity or something completely separate?
Something completely separate.
Okay, that kind of fell into the idea.
Yeah, postmodernism became the pervading philosophical thought, and so it's just kind of grown into our culture,
Okay.
and it's something that the church is having to deal with.
I feel like people hate being told they're wrong. And so like as a Christian, if I like meet a non-Christian, if I'm like, you're wrong, my way's the only way, or whatever, like this is the only way, people get angry, and like you push them away from the Christian faith. So as a girl, I don't want to have a bunch of people mad at me, so I float towards postmodernism, like, well, like, okay, like what you're doing is like what you're doing, but the God I serve is blah, 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 blah. And so I feel like in an effort not to push people away from faith, I float towards postmodernism just to like not offend people.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, you look at something like that where it's, you know that even if you believe so strongly in something, and the best way that you think to help someone would be like, you know, no, like, you know, you could go to hell, or you could do this. Like when I was like in kindergarten, I told a kid on the bus, I was like, are you a Christian? And he was like, no. And I was like, well, you're going to hell. And like, because my mom was like just telling me about Christianity and like, you know, if you accept Christ and all this stuff. And so, like in my head, that's what made sense, is to tell people that like, you need to be a Christian so you don't go to hell. Like it was more concern at that age, but then you get older.
James Webb, the evangelist.
You're going to hell. But no, I mean,
And they slew them in the spirit.
yeah, but like as a kid, that was my way of thinking. So it's like, when you get older, is it just a maturity thing, or is it like the postmodernism thing that happened?
I think it's a maturity into your culture, so you become more culturally aware of, oh, this is how people around me operate, so I too will operate in this postmodern mindset.
I think that's definitely evident in like people that come from more conservative and like modern backgrounds. I guess they'll just believe, I guess, stuff in the Bible and other truths that get passed on down to them as like truth because it is, and you can kind of tell those people, because
The
if
whole
you ever,
fundamentalist strain.
if you ever,
Jerry Falwell
yeah,
and stuff.
if you ever talk to them, they're gonna be like, no, this is the truth, like 6-day creation with God resting on the 7th day, and like boom, 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 like really sound.
It's a truth
concrete
because
things.
that's, I mean, duh, that's not necessarily true. It's what they believe has been true all along,
Yes.
and so you can't change that. Whereas,
Yeah.
granted, it probably hasn't been what the church has believed necessarily all along, but
And it's all a package deal.
Yeah.
So
Right.
this is truth. So then the fear is, then if you negate this portion over here, then there's like it takes away from the whole rest of it being
Yeah.
truth.
I think it's important to realize there is room for postmodernism in the church. I mean, and that's been acknowledged for a while. We probably didn't call it postmodernism, but when you talk about capital T truth, where do we get that from? Church history, the global church, scripture, and personal experience. I think those are the 4, right?
And a
Yeah.
lithogram, whatever.
Right,
Or a
exactly.
Wesleyan quadrilateral.
Yep.
Right. So and there's personal experience in there. So there is part. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, for instance, let's say for Jeremy, going to be in the full-time ministries one way or another is like that's capital T truth for him.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not for me. You know, that wouldn't be what's right for me to do.
Yeah.
There's personal experience in there. So there are places in your life where postmodernism is true. And so for Jeremy to tell me every single Christian has to be in full-time ministry in the pastorate or in serving in a nonprofit, well, I'd be like, no, like you can't tell me that. That's true for you, but it's not true for me.
Yeah.
So in the quadrilateral area, that one quadrant does deal with postmodernism. You know, I think it's acceptable for it to fit in there into our culture. And so to talk with our culture like that, like, you know, there are areas that, you know, we can disagree what's right, technically, and both of us to be right. But there's these 3 other areas, such as the global church, what Scripture says about our overarching narrative, and what church tradition says about our faith that can't be changed.
Yeah.
You know, the past 2,000 years can't be erased. We have to take that as part of our truth also.
So I guess how do we reconcile those things? Because one of the things that Rob Bell says in his book, Velvet Elvis, is he talks about like the difference between like a modern church being built out of like bricks of truth, like we know this to be true, versus it needs to be, he says, more of like a spring where it still holds its shape, but it's able to like stretch. So I guess how do we ensure that we are remaining Christians while allowing so much freedom of, I guess, choice and like thought?
I think he, with that whole analogy of the idea of like if you're using the brick and mortar, then you're creating walls, and it's an us against them mentality, which is the whole issue of like, okay, my truth's better than your truth, which turned a lot of postmodern mindset people off, and it just seems condescending. But then the idea of it being a spring or like a trampoline, and so you're just inviting people to jump with you, and together you get higher, kind of thing. Like it's. I think there's some truth to it. I think that's kind of how the church. There's, it gets critiqued and hated on by kind of the conservative, modern part of, or still kind of modern focused part of the church. But that the idea of if the world is rejecting truth based off science and fact, and it's not based off of and divine, if that's not the starting point anymore, and the starting point is experience, then that's where the church should be helping people experience God. And so the whole idea of people, rejecting the narrative of like reason. Well, people. There's the personal narrative. They want to. We all, think we have some type of story. We want to figure out what that story looks like. Well, the beauty of the majority of the church, especially like a church like the Catholic Church or someone who has a long history, is that they have this long narrative, and so you can provide the whole story of Christianity and of Christ provides that story, and I think it's hard because you can't just like give a tract because it's people don't accept that as fact, but it's journeying with people and it's helping them live into the story of the Church and Christianity. So by living it, you then begin to experience it as truth.
I'm probably simplifying this, but that's what I do. What makes postmodernism anything different than just human nature and humans disagreeing with one another or not accepting something or just being accepting of something? Why is postmodernism this thing that's being slapped as a label onto something that is just human nature?
I
and
think the
humans
only
being-
culture you've seen is postmodern, so you think that's what's normal, but in the past, 10,000 years, it hasn't always been.
It
that
really
way.
hasn't. Like,
So, like you think, oh, of course, like if I told you the way you live your life is wrong, like you should not drive a Honda Civic, and you're like, well, you can't tell me to do that. Like that's just human nature for me to not let you do that. Well, it hasn't always been that way. Like
I get that, but I'm saying just not
Disagree.
just
The
disagree.
focus of postmodernism is not on the disagreement.
it's on
It's on-
overarching truths.
right.
Do
Okay.
you get what
So
I'm
it's
Yeah.
not like we're disagreeing because like we're disagreeing and we're just like, oh, you can believe what you believe, I believe. Is that I don't disagree with you. Like I hold a separate set of beliefs of truth, but that doesn't make yours any less.
It's not calling it wrong.
Yeah, but is that like in the same religion, or is that or is that just a broad like a
Well,
a
the way
Christian talking to a Muslim?
The way that looks, I mean, that's the biggest push against a lot of religions against that is because then it illegitimizes religions, whichever one you're in, because whichever one you're in, you obviously believe is the highest form of truth.
Yeah.
And postmodern says there isn't. But then when it comes in, and so then what you see that as is some elements of the emergent church saying, okay, you can believe whatever you want. God's a loving God. He's not going to send anyone to hell. It's just like, the whole universalism.
Universalist.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Of like, we're all getting to the same place. We're just,
Taking
getting there
different
different
roads.
ways. Yeah. Some of us are in Honda Civics. Some of us are in buses.
Subi.
Buses.
Range Rover.
Buses.
Who is a Range Rover?
Hummer limo.
So you were mentioning the fact of the importance of like church tradition, and I guess in figuring out what we're about. One of the things that Brian McLaren talks about in one of the books that we read was, I guess, some of the stuff that the church has allowed and has grown as part of the church, and just a lot of the baggage that the church carries with it. And that's kind of something that hurts us as a church, is that so many people could point to like things that have happened in the past. A lot of people point to the Crusades. And so I guess how do we, rectify our past and use tradition, the tradition and past of the church, and use it as something that kind of legitimizes us, while at the same time dealing with all the baggage? Because one of the things Brian McLaren says is kind of that what we have as the church now has been corrupted, and we need to go back to kind of like an Acts first century church and stuff like that. So how do we, I guess, I'm kind of repeating myself, but like rectify the movement of the Holy Spirit over the past 2,000 years with, I guess, the atrocities that have happened in the name of Christianity?
Isn't that kind of what the Pope's doing, like, right now? Like, there's been so much, like, negativity on, like, the Catholic Church at times, but, like, he started off by, like, asking for the people to pray for him, and then going and talking with Muslims and, like, with other countries. Like, he's still following the huge tradition of the church, but is, at the same time, trying to set examples of how we should then live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Good point. I agree.
I mean, he's setting a good example to follow. I think that the church at a number of times in our history has felt remorse and rectified certain situations, misstepped. And I don't know, I haven't read the McLaren book. I've read some of this stuff, but not that book. And I think that to say that the church is corrupted now, I think is wrong. I don't think that, God is all about his church. He wouldn't let it get that far astray,
Yeah, I agree.
So if this is the path, so in a person's life, like if this is the path you should be on, there's a decent amount of deviation in there, and you can make mistakes, but you can still be on the right path. I think the same for the church. If this is the path the church, should be on, we're somewhere on that path. We're not on a different road. Like, I don't think we need to backtrack, 500,000 years, 2,000 years back. Hey, we got to switch this up and go back. No, we're in a good place. We need to change things. We've made mistakes, but so does every person in their life. The church is made up of people, and I don't think at any point in history has the church been void of people seeking God, and seeking is finding. Like, it's not about like finding; it's about seeking. It's all about the journey. So to say the journey isn't valid and the journey we've been on is void and corrupt, I don't think that's true.
I mean, like with the whole, looking at the church and how it used to be and how it is now, and people saying like, well, the church needs to rise up, the church needs to do this, and and get better, in whatever ways people are saying the church to get better. Like, will the church ever be that like firm, strong thing that like changes everything? You know what I'm saying? Like how kind of that thought of how we want it to be. Mm-hmm. Like I don't think that the church will ever get to that level. You know what I'm saying? Like it may just be my, but I mean I don't think the church is going to do. Like, yes, like you said, it has. There's the mistakes that are made, things that happen, people making mistakes, people being humans, but like the church rising up to that level of just like, completely changing the world and not just where they are at that moment, like ministering to people.
I would disagree, because I would say that would be saying that God's plan for the church is not achievable and will not happen. Because God's plan for the church is to revolutionize it, is to bring His kingdom into the world. Like, we're the ones that's supposed to usher heaven here.
Though I do have to say, it may not look the way that we would see.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not saying like that the people of the church and of God will go and like, I totally believe that as Christians we would go and change the world for the better in every way possible. But kind of this like way that we want it to look. You know what I'm saying? That this kind of, does anyone?
Very Constantinian.
Yeah.
We're in charge of everything.
Yeah. I mean.
No, I don't think it'll look that, and I don't think it should. I think that's like I think that may have served a phase. Sorry, were you gonna? I think that's my biggest problem with kind of the postmodern emergent leaders in the church is that it seems a lot of times they discount the.
They're getting married. It's cool.
It was sticking straight up. I'm so sorry.
Did they discount the work of the? They discount the work of the Holy Spirit, and the fact that we've done stuff wrong, but like, so then you're saying that like humanity is stronger than the ability of God to like lead like his bride that He's left, like the Holy Spirit is God. And like if the church has that, then like I feel like what you said, we can't deviate too far off that. But I think that the best way for the church to kind of rectify that is to kind of be confessional on that, to be like when you try to hide brokenness and when you try to hide problems, it doesn't work because it'll get found out, and then it just looks worse. I mean, sadly, there's several religious leaders in like the Catholic Church that are evidence of that. Yes, there's brokenness everywhere, but it's worse when you try to hide it for the sake of trying to seem like you're perfect. The church isn't perfect, not this side of eternity and glorification and all those big words. But like, yeah, the church is good, but I think going back to the whole journeying and storytelling, like if you are journeying with people together and showing your brokenness but accepting theirs as well, then they can find beauty, they can see the beauty of the church, the beauty of Christianity, and the fact that it's calling people to like a great story. And I think within the Nazarene idea, I think the Nazarenes got it right in the idea that calling us to holiness, but that's not a
legalistic kind of sending.
Yeah, and we're humans. It's not calling us to be God. Like it's not calling us to have perfect knowledge on stuff. like we were created lesser than God. We were created less than angels. So it's not like we'll ever become, you know, these supreme beings through our Christian faith, at least, you know, not this side of death and this side of Christ's return, but like this church has a great story that it can offer. It just, I think, has to be honest about the brokenness in that story and the fact that we're still journeying on it.
I feel like there also has to be a lot of like forgiveness and healing that has to occur with all those hurts and the damage that the church has done, because like forgiveness has a huge effect on healing like physical health and like end of life stuff. Like I'm a nursing major, sorry. There's significant links between peace and bodily healing at the end of life when families sit down and have forgiveness episodes, because of just the intense amount of effect it has on the soul. So I think that so much of that needs to be transferred into the church, and if there is something that has happened, there needs to be healing and forgiveness that takes place, and the church needs to be able to recognize like this is what we've done wrong, and we are like we recognize that, and we're not trying to hide that, because if you just try and pretend like you see it but you're just breezing over it, there's no good is going to come from it.
Sorry, I was gonna say, like, well, do you think that, I mean, looking at the guys who know more about it, that the postmodernist movement would cause that forgiveness to happen more? Like, do you think it would create people to be more forgiving of other people, or you think it would decrease that? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm just wondering. Like,
I don't know if it had any effect. I don't think it would increase it because it's a pretty selfish
And
it's a self-involved.
yeah.
idea.
I mean, just because of like, you know, that the acceptance type of thing and being like, I'm not
Tolerance,
wrong. Yeah,
all that.
tolerance.
Mhm.
Would it cause people to be more forgiving?
I think it will just depend how you use it, because a lot of the stuff in postmodernism could either cause you to, I guess, ignore what other people are saying because you can be like, okay, that's for you, but this is for me. Well, at the same time, postmodernism, at least in the church, in the context of what like we've done, brings up a lot of issues with just asking us why we believe what we believe, and so kind of just causing people to like question their motives and stuff like that. If that makes sense. Does that answer the question?
I think the church's ability to use modern and pre-modern language is dead, and our culture will not accept it at all. But the life of the church history, the life of love that Jesus brought, people will still listen to. Even if that life preaches this is the best way, people will still listen to that because everybody wants to know the best way.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's
just the way we are.
right. Like, you can be postmodern, but when you get down like to the basic level, everybody's searching for the best way, and there's a best way. You know, and when people see it, they'll buy into it.
In postmodernism, what do you think is the role of the church? And I guess kind of bringing the kingdom forward.
I think the role for the church going forward is kind of embracing I think some of the aspects of postmodernism, because if the church is, you know, modeled after Christ, and Christ, the way that he moved and did his ministry was with journeying with people and with living life with them, and that was the way that, you know, the early church looked like, that they were living life out together, and that kind of changed over time because they went from being a small group to a larger group of people, and then they went from a larger group of suppressed people to those who were in power. It's changed over time, and so it's just a matter of the church being willing to journey and, you know, not move away or compromise its beliefs, but it's like, you know, focused beliefs, but in terms of peripherals and how it acts it out, that it continues to journey with the movement of humanity.
It's a good response. Thank you for talking, guys. It's been good.
And thanks for watching. Join in next week And
when we talk
second-
about how only you can prevent forest fires.